Welcome to another Pax8 Cyber Collective podcast. Today, we want to sort of get into talking about a topic that a lot of MSPs generally have challenges with, and that is really around incident response planning, and what they actually do around their policies and processes with incident response. Today, I've got two experts in the field. Of course, I've got a SME. In the vein of Dr. Vaughan Shanks, who comes from a company called Cydarm, who provide IR planning and IR playbook type software that assists MSSPs and potentially MSPs in the future. We've also got Hugh Burns, who is our MSP expert for today's call, with a MSP based in New Zealand. I'll open up to you first, Hugh, to do a little bit of an introduction around what you do, who you are, and your company.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Elliot. So as you mentioned, we're an MSP in New Zealand, based out of Christchurch. We look after the Canterbury region. We have clients all around the country. We're really servicing that small to medium enterprise part of the market. And we focus on infrastructure and cloud and security and more governance these days as well. In terms of my role, I look after the security side of things, any platform development or product development, and really keeping the lights on and making sure we're supporting our clients.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Great to have you today. I know you attended my IR course that we run through the Pax8 Academy last year. So it would be great to hear how that's gone for you, and obviously today what you guys have done as part of that in terms of your planning to improve your IR strategy. And Dr. Vaughan, shall we call you Doc Vaughan, Dr. Shanks?
Just Vaughan is fine. Just Vaughan is
Okay.
fine. Although I go by Shanksy in some circles as well. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Cydarm Technologies. As you mentioned, we're a software vendor, so we make a software platform that's used by security operations centers, and our customers include everything from the big end of town and government agencies down to MSSPs. We don't generally work with small to medium enterprises other than, say, an MSSP, but it is my hope that we'll be able to get our platform to scale someday where we can offer that direct assistance to smaller enterprises. At present, we're focused on, the larger enterprise market, but I'm always very happy to do whatever I can to help support the security of smaller businesses. So on which we all depend. So very happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. On that, I know I used your Cydarm platform as just an example of partners potentially leveraging solutions out there that can assist with their journey into planning for their IR response. A lot of them, generally, the major challenge, at least through my discussions with a lot of partners, is they don't know where to start, or they don't know what they should be applying as part of that. There are a lot of helpful organizations out there that have templates and things like that, but someone who hasn't come from that field generally struggle with identifying what should be done, what should be modified, right? What is unique to their own scenario. From your mind, how does a platform support that? How does your particular platform, let's say, provide guidance in terms of building out playbooks and planning for an IR response capabilities?
Yeah, so we provide a platform which is more of the medium for hosting the content. So certainly there's plenty of good advice available, and it's really up to individual organizations to find the advice that's most relevant for them. And I'd recommend go to an MSSP such as yourselves, or even go and check out your national cybersecurity agency, the government agency that handles that. I know certainly in Australia, ASD or ACSC has a lot of very good advice. Where you want to use a platform, though, is when it comes down to executing on that advice. So in other words, once you've got some semblance of a strategy or a plan around how you're going to respond to incidents, how do you put that into action? You're going to need to record information about what your goals and objectives are, or short-term tasks. You'll need to know who's carrying out those tasks, and you'll need to be able to go back and give an account of what happened when you're done. So there's various ways you can do this. If you're really short on resources, you can always grab something like a spreadsheet. But certainly, I would encourage people, if you have any need for ongoing or repeated incident management, something like a platform like Cydarm is probably going to be very useful.
Yeah, great points. It is something I encourage people to look at. There's always a way to do it, cheaply and easily. But getting, a few of the out-of-the-box playbooks in my mind is going to sort of help guide you through that process and really get a better understanding of what that incident response process could look like. Help to build out the policies and actually, use as almost like a checklist that's pre-created for you, so that you can use that as part of your simulations that you should hopefully be doing. If not, something that you can start doing. Hugh, from your side, from an MSP perspective, what are the, challenges that you've found over the years that as part of incident response planning? I know from my perspective, but from your perspective, what are the challenges that you have come across and then you're probably having at the moment as going through that IR planning stage?
Well, I guess you can look at this from two angles, really. There's us as an MSP. We are a small, medium business in our own right, and so we've got to go through that process ourselves. We've also like to look after our own house internally. And there's been a lot of growing and developing over the years. We had to mature as a business, just like any other business. Learn from experience, learn from some trials and tribulations and those sorts of things. But we've also got to take that knowledge and expertise and help apply it to our clients as well. Looking after the SME market, one of the things that we're really looking at the moment is the governance piece. And I guess a lot of MSPs can fall into this trap of, we are the trusted IT provider for the clients out there, and they sometimes put a bit too much trust in their IT provider or the MSP. You might have sort of backup products in place, and unless you have the right discussions with those clients, they tend to think you've got everything covered. You're taking on that risk for them. So it's a really important piece to have those governance discussions and talk to them about putting in, things like BCDR plans and incident response plans, so that it's all out on the table. It's where it's all open, and we know, who has responsibility of which piece of the puzzle. So, I guess that governance piece would be the biggest challenge at this stage.
Board, any thoughts on that? What's your experience in working with larger MSCs, SMEs,
Yeah,
I should say?
definitely. I think there is a need to have a very open and frank conversation between an IT service provider and their customers. And I think being very clear on your shared responsibility model, to coin an industry term, and where each person's responsibility, which will ultimately become their liability when things go bad, where it ends. So I think for a small business who is expecting the IT outsourced provider to handle everything for them, if you're not doing that, you need to be very clear with them what you can and cannot do, and who you might bring in the event that things spiral out of control and you have to bring in specialist support, which depending on the size of your company, you may not always have on hand. And then when you have a process to respond to an incident, you need to make very sure that you've got points of accountability and decision making determined across the different players involved. So if you have a situation where you have a business and an IT service provider and then an MSSP, and maybe on top of that, there could even be some kind of DFIR firm that's called in for really serious jobs. You need to be very clear about passage of information and where decisions get made and how those decisions get promulgated. And to make things even more tricky, you have to assume that many of your standard corporate systems, at least on the customer side, are compromised. So if you're using your customer email account to send and receive instructions, how do you know that that's not how the threat actor got in, and they're actually reading your emails and anticipating your next move, or even impersonating you? So I think having out-of-band communications but having a really clear decision point with people and processes is important.
Yep, completely agree with that. And I think that's what a lot of MSPs, a lot of partners, or I'm going to actually even go further. A lot of people in the IT industry just don't have a good grasp of having those type of conversation, asking the right questions, and really analysing the risk within organisations they're working with or working for. Um, there's been a lot of talk about insurance and how they play a part of incident response planning. Typically, speaking to some insurance brokers recently, a lot of the insurance policyholders are kind of taking ownership on the incident response planning, right? Or the engagement, I should say. So if there is an incident, if you have a cybersecurity insurance policy, it generally goes to them and they lead with that. How does that impact an internal organization's processes and planning strategy? How closely should they be aligned and working with their insurance providers? Vaughan, I'll throw it out to you first.
Yeah, again, depending on the terms of the policy and what's included, what kind of assistance or help you can get through via your insurance provider. And my understanding is there's often a circle between when an incident happens, you call your insurance provider, they contact a DFIR firm. I think maybe there's lawyers involved. I think that there might even be legal counsel at some point, and then they call DFIR, and then DFIR engages back. So there's sort of this cycle, and I think you have to just be aware of what you can expect, what their incentives are, and what they're willing to do for you, and also be aware of what they're not. And certainly, I would caution people, if you're getting an insurance policy, it's very similar to getting a home and contents insurance policy, where they're not going to go and do a check on your business and make sure you've got all the controls in place. You'll need to self-report and make an attestation that you have, the right MFA and endpoint detection and response, and maybe even an MSSP service like yourselves. Similar to like a burglary, if the threat actor is able to compromise you and you're found to not have those controls that you claim to have, or you didn't read the fine print, they might actually decline to give you a payout. So I'd say just be, treat it like any other insurance policy. Make sure you check the T's and C's.
Yeah, Hugh, have you experienced anything like that yet? Going through your planning steps?
It's interesting actually, because I guess the cyber insurance market in New Zealand, I'd call it a bit immature, and I've been surprised by the lack of requirements in that space compared to what we're seeing overseas. And really that puts the onus back on the MSP and with their clients to go through that process to actually make sure they've got the right things in place. Like, as Vaughan says, if you are found to not have had the right protections in place after you've been breached, they may not pay out. And I've found they haven't been very forthcoming as to what those requirements are from the get-go. So at this stage, I can see that's going to come. There's going to be more requirements there in the future, but at this stage, the onus is really on that client to make sure they've crossed their T's and dotted their I's and got things in place to make sure that they are going to be in a good position if the worst does occur.
I think, to be fair, you could say about the insurance industry, in New Zealand and Australia and elsewhere, they simply don't have enough data to calculate what the premium and your deductible or excess should be. I mean, you look at a well-known industry like life insurance. People have been living and dying for a long time. We know that smoking causes cancer and will increase your chances of mortality. We simply don't know with cyber. And a confounding factor here is that the threat landscape changes every year, and you're at the mercy of people often in foreign jurisdictions. So it's not even, someone from the next suburb that's burgling your house. They're coming from who knows where. You don't necessarily know what they want. Maybe they don't know what they want. So it's actually a very volatile space, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. We've seen, or at least in Australia, some policy providers actually stipulating the bare minimum requirements, as you mentioned, Vaughan. New Zealand will hopefully change soon, now that they are about to present, or they've presented their own version of their framework, and I think it's highly factored on NIST or built around NIST, which is about time in my mind. But hopefully with that comes a little bit more alignment to that framework, or a framework to provide some information around next steps, and then introduce some baselines, which you guys currently don't have. I know a lot of partners I'm working with in New Zealand use the Essential 8 in Australia as their baseline framework to provide as part of guidance. But even on the back of that, without any regulation, without any sort of support from the government through advisement, partners still have to obviously do the right thing. Hugh, you're going through that process now with your team to sort of build out your IR plans, and I think one of the questions I asked on my course, or I can't remember the exact question, was around how many of you actually have written down your IR process, or is it all in your heads? I can't remember how you responded to that, but the vast majority of that class said it's all in their heads. That is obviously a problem from a defensibility side of things. If you go through a situation where you get taken to court, either by the client, the government, or even your insurance providers, that becomes a challenge because you can't articulate, unless it's written down and on paper or as part of your process and policies, what you should or should not have done as part of that. Are you going through that right now in terms of documenting, or with any of the tools and stuff you're providing with your clients, the process in terms of your IR planning?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a trap that a lot of MSPs can fall into. They often have a bunch of clever people internally. They just rely on them responding when the worst happens, but you've got to have it written down, as you say. Fortunately, we've over time developed plenty of documentation through various incidents we've been through. Thankfully nothing internally for us, but it's not just about breaches too. It's about, for example, we've had clients hit by outages from various services, and it's just a business continuity. So your incident response has to cover those sorts of scenarios as well. So there's been no shortage of those in the past for us to practice on and to document. So, but at the moment we're going through, I've been on courses with you previously about the CIS controls and the benefit they can provide. You talk about the Essential 8 and those sorts of governance locally, but we found the CIS controls as a great fit and a great pragmatic way for us and our clients to go on that cybersecurity journey. So I guess it's just a good chance for us to review that internally, formalise our documents, make sure we're in line with industry best practices. It's a constant review process for us. But yeah, so we've done it in the past. Now it's just a case of just looking at it again and making sure it's best practice.
Yeah, I think a lot of partners think about an IR plan as being a single plan that addresses every single type of incident that could occur, right? I think one of the things we sort of discuss heavily is around looking at that as more of a playbook concept, and this is where something like a Cydarm solution comes into play. Is not every type of incident will have the same steps you need to follow, right? If it's a business email compromise or phishing type incident, there are steps and different tools and processes and people you're going to have to get involved as part of that. If it's a ransomware attack, well, that's a completely different type of playbook that you need to sort of bring out. So the trap that partners get into is they think incident response is just one thing they need to put out there and don't realize there's all these other things that they need to consider, right? If you get a account compromise, that's another different set of steps. So it does take a little bit of legwork, does take a bit of time to put this together. But what I would typically advise is start from somewhere, start small. What is the sort of key critical areas that you want to cover first, and then just evolve from that, right? Start, every month, add a new plan. At least it gets you somewhere, and it also helps with that defensible argument, right? Because especially with MSPs who are typically working with 50 plus types of clients, you might have a customized type of incident response for all of those. All of them can kind of look themselves from a generic point of view, but there is going to be subtle differences in terms of, all right, who's my contact points, who's the insurance provider, who are all these communication lines that are going to need to change from client to client that you need to articulate as part of your planning as well. And trying to document that all manually in a spreadsheet can be a bit tricky, and that's kind of why I've invited Vaughan on, because that's where something like a solution like Cydarm can assist, because you can actually put that all in like a central database to and then manipulate it and duplicate it and customize it as needed. There are challenges around there. Obviously, and I'm not saying this is possible, Vaughan, but if Cydarm is not accessible, you obviously need to have that backup approach as well, right? So you need to have an incident response plan for your incident response platform, right? So those are the things to consider as part of sort of creating your holistic strategy around cybersecurity. Vaughan, have I missed anything? Any comments on
No,
what?
that's a pretty good summary. I would say my advice would be the very first thing you need is a disaster recovery plan, and that can double as a plan for if you have a serious hard drive failure or a flood. If you're in a low-lying area, your IT stuff gets wiped out. How would you recover everything in the event you lose everything? And that actually a ransomware incident can look like a lot like that, in the sense that if it's pure ransomware and not an extortion attempt, then you've basically lost access to a whole lot of data. And how do you restore that? A recent case of a friend of mine actually who runs a medium-sized enterprise. They were ransomwared, and his IT staff had been criticizing him for a while, saying, "Why do you make this backup and take it home with you?" He had this offline backup that he had on a special hard drive, and they all said that's not part of our standard environment. We've got cloud backups, don't you know? Turns out the ransomware actors also encrypted the cloud backups, so he was very glad to have that offline storage. But if you had a fire at the office or something, it could be the same situation. So start with that, and then I think if you have a need to deal with ongoing security incidents, and I would imagine at an MSP of any sufficient size, your customers will have, if you aggregate all of the things your customers are doing, it will start to become a regular thing. Then you might want to have some kind of playbook that you follow. And when you get to the right level of maturity, a platform such as Cydarm might be the right solution, so that you've got not only a system for hosting the playbooks, updating them, assigning actions to people and carrying them out, but also if you use a hosted solution that's not in your IT infrastructure, so it's an externally hosted system, then if all of your IT infrastructure is compromised, you can still log into the external system and manage the incident. So that would be my answer to what do you do if your incident response platform is compromised. Well, ideally, it's not connected to your corporate infrastructure.
I think there's an important distinction there too, and you touched on it there, Vaughan, about having a disaster recovery plan, which is obviously absolutely essential. But I think an important role that an incident response plan can play is at what point do you need to kick off your disaster recovery processes. So it's about identifying the scale of what's happened. Like it could be a single user compromise. You don't want to go restoring business systems based on that. So it's really key to identify what the issue is and what the impact is, and have the key personnel looking at it and looking at the right things, so you determine, is this bad enough to kick in our disaster recovery solutions.
I think that's a good point to bring in, sort of a point of technical or legal note in this is when does a security event become a security incident? And I mean incident with a capital I. And I think you don't want to say we've had a security incident until you know it's an incident, and then you're going into incident response, and it's a more defined process. It's you've done your fire drills, you know what to do, but being very clear about a security event versus a security incident, and maybe a user having some kind of malicious software running on their computer. Maybe it doesn't reach the threshold yet of an incident, but that can depend on what industry you're in and what your reporting requirements are. And I think when you get to the level of a publicly traded company, when you declare a security incident, that nowadays is something you might even have to make public, or at least find a way to let your shareholders know. Otherwise, if it has a material impact on the business, it could actually be, you could be effectively withholding information and withholding, risk.
Yeah,
I'd go. A good point. Sorry, Hugh, you go.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that in regards to defining that, whether it's an incident, with a capital I, as you say, it's important to have those defined beforehand. And I think a lot of organisations don't do that. They tend to make it up on the fly. How bad is this? But if you have that sort of terms of reference done beforehand, then it's clear as day, and it just helps execute those processes later.
Yeah, it helps to speed it up because you've basically got a plan of action in front of you rather than trying to do that guesswork, right? In the case of emergency, the last thing you want your paramedic to do is let me look at the manual and see what I'm supposed to do next, right? So it's having that trusted or that guidebook or those steps. And obviously, as part of the simulations that's running through it, you can then identify your gaps and do a bit of analysis to see, is this fit for purpose? Is this actually going to achieve the outcome that we're looking for as well? Something Vaughan mentioned there around is it a status of whether it actually becomes an incident? That could go a step further, and particularly for Australian partners or any other partners that have those regulatory requirements, that also escalates to, is it a breach, right? Because in Australia, we have the notifiable data breach scheme, which is mandatory item that we have to report if there is a breach of sensitive data or PII data in that sort of realm. If it is incident, it could be an account compromise that threat actor's got into the environment. But unless he's actually, or that person has gone through and stolen or accessed or seen data, it is not yet potentially considered a breach, right? So those type of things will also determine what's my next line of communication. Do I have to report this to the ACSC or whichever other governing body that I got to report it to? So those help as part of that escalation path as well. On something I heard last week from another person I was speaking to about this is the response good? And it's touched on something that you said, Hugh, is when we need to go through that escalation path, when we need to sort of figure out what next steps are, sometimes it may be appropriate, and these are the steps you can document to say, hey, this is where I stop, right? There's nothing I can do. The incident itself or the actions of that threat actor is in a position where I can no longer deal with it as part of my incident response plan. But to have those safeguards built into your planning to say, hey, at this point, if you can't do this, right, this is time to get someone else involved. Maybe your insurance provider, maybe this is where I need to actually reach out to the government organisation and the NCSC in New Zealand or the ACSC in Australia and get their help, right? Bring in the federal police or bring in some other DFIR type providers. Those are things that need to be documented in this process as well, right? But I guess the message I'm getting at, sometimes it's not always viable to just follow the playbook step by step. At some point, you got to make a decision to say, hey, I need to pause and stop here and, communicate effectively and say, we can't do any more. We can't take the next steps because there is a massive roadblock in our way. Right? Vaughan, from your experience, because obviously you're the most experienced of all three of us on this, have you seen that? Have you been through that situation where you just have to stop?
So personally, no. We're I'd remind you we're a software vendor, so we don't get deeply involved in the issues of our customers. They usually manage their own security, and we provide the platform they use. But I do speak to a lot of people who experience security events on a regular basis and security incidents occasionally. So I'm aware of the decision making and the process they go through. And I think it's worth at a high level if you're following a workflow like NIST. Preparation, detection, triage analysis, or the steps you would go through at a high level. That remains roughly the same with maybe some iteration back and forwards. But then when you get down into specific incidents, you might want to have playbooks that are tailored for particular types of incidents. So whether it be a successful phishing email compromise or a web shell or an attempted ransomware attack, extortion, even where someone's claiming on the dark web they have a trove of data from you. So you want to have a process like that. And to your point, having clear definitions of both escalation points and points where you stop. So for example, if there's been a phishing attempt and it was unsuccessful and you're certain of that, you need to know when to put the tools down and move on to the next task. You can't keep chasing these threat actors all over the internet. There's too many of them. But yeah, when things do get quite serious, you need to know, when are we declaring an incident, when are we calling for help, when are we notifying the government, and who holds the decision authority for that? So who do we need to ask if we're going to proceed?
Yeah, that question's come up recently, actually, around where does the liability lie, where does the responsibility lie as a MSSP or MSP providing these services to clients. From my mind, it's typically the client. The client typically is the ultimate one that's responsible, particularly as the business owner or directors. If they're holding the insurance policy, it still comes down to them to be the one that's responsible to notify whichever agencies, insurance, etc., etc. The job of the MSP or MSSP in this regard is to advise. It's like, we now have gone through this process and say, hey, Hugh, we need to advise this client that something needs to happen. We need to report that. We need to take the next steps, right? So the liability doesn't necessarily sit with the MSPs or MSSPs in this process. It ultimately lies with the business owners and the directors board of that company. Yes, Vaughan, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say on that, it's important to remember that even if you're using external services, you still own your own risk. And it's a bit like when you talk to a lawyer, they can give you advice, but they're not going to do anything until you ask them to proceed. And they might say, look, I can produce a letter for you and send a letter to somebody to threaten legal action or whatever. But unless you say, yes, I want to do that, I understand the consequences and I want to go ahead with it, they won't do that. And I think with cybersecurity and incident response, it's a very similar thing. It's great to have good advice online, but you need to also be prepared to lean into that and understand what's being explained to you and actually make a call based on that advice.
Yeah, it's around liability and defensibility. Sorry, Hugh, just on that point, because ultimately, if you prematurely advise or announce to, that could get public information out there and potentially damage that particular client's brand without their say-so and then without their approval, they could point the finger back at you and say, hey, MSP, you're the one at fault. You shouldn't have announced this prematurely without our approval. So it's kind of moving that defensible angle and protecting yourself as much as that. So get everything in writing. Don't get it verbally. You want to actually obviously back yourself if anything was to escalate past that point. Sorry, Hugh. Go.
Yeah, just to add to that, it's really important that these SMEs have that documented who has the authority. It could be the business owner or the shareholder. The business owner could be out on a boat, day fishing, and something happens. If he's not reachable, then who's responsible? And you don't want to have to make those decisions when everyone's clamoring around when there's an incident happening. It's really important that line of authority is documented beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. Having multiple points of communication is typically recommended in most parts. Hugh, going back to your perspective from an MSP side, what has been, I guess, your biggest challenge as part of going through this process today?
In regards to us dealing with it internally or client facing?
Let's look at both. Let's start with you internally. How are you addressing that? What's the biggest challenge in creating an incident response playbook or plan within your own organisation?
I guess the biggest challenge thinking about it would be the variety of different situations you can come across. I think I've touched on this before, but you can't have one playbook for everything that's going to happen. Sure, you can develop some playbooks for, and we do this if, one of our users has their email compromised, it's got a clear playbook about what happens. But if the breach is more complex, it's company wide, or it may not even be a breach. It's just an incident that's got the business on its knees or whatever. So really, it's the variety of incidents that can lead to having to declare an incident and making sure I've got all those parts covered. I guess that's really the main challenge for us as an MSP serving our clients. But again, I'll just go back to that governance point with most of the SMEs, where I guess we're on a bit of a path to try and educate our clients and talk to them about that governance piece so that they are prepared for these things and know that they are the data owners, they are responsible for these systems. We will advise and help protect in whatever capacity we can, but ultimately we need to empower them to make those decisions and get those systems and processes in place themselves.
And kind of touched on it, but any specific challenges working with your clients?
Maturity in the space, really. They trust their IT providers too much, and I guess it could be a market thing here in New Zealand too. People, that should be right attitude. Not planning for the worst case scenario or thinking that it could happen to them. We're down here at the bottom of the earth and no one's going to be attacking our stuff, but the reality is it can and it will happen. So I guess having those discussions with the client and having it with the client at the right level too. You might get technical staff in an organisation who are, sometimes they can be protecting their own patch, but if you get the right people in the room, the shareholders, the ones who are responsible for maintaining their risk register and helping them build that risk register out, then you can start to present the potential issues that they need to address.
Yeah, it all needs to start, and you mentioned CIS controls, and obviously this is something that we talk a lot about here at PaxAid. It gives you that good prescriptive checklist to sort of follow, and it starts with identifying your assets and prioritizing your assets, right? If you don't know what you're trying to secure and protect, it's all for naught, right? If you miss something that is a potential entry point into the environment, right? Something as simple as you've probably seen the article around toothbrushes being smart toothbrushes being impacted. It goes down to those all the way down to those obscure IoT devices that you probably haven't thought about. Maybe those audio boxes that's sitting by your desk that's connected to your laptop. Those are the type of things that we need to think more of. And yeah, there are some basic things that we need to do, and this is generally where I see MSPs going. Is we need to do some core baseline security before we can think about our incident response plans. But for me, it's something that needs to be worked in as part of that process, and right from the get-go, as part of right from the start, because you will get yourself in the position where you've got now 10, 15 vendors that you're now providing as part of your security services, and only the security services. I'm not even talking about all the IT stuff that you guys are providing. That you don't have an incident response plan for. So yes, you put layers of protection in, but if you get a breach, you have that right of boom, right? Another industry term, and you don't know what to do. Well, it's all for naught, right? You've provided something, you've made these grand promises to your clients that you now can't actually activate or achieve because you don't know what the steps to take after the fact, right? So it becomes very messy, and I've seen some partners get burnt by that, which is why we're trying to sort of support them, and why we're basically having this conversation today.
I guess that's why we like a framework like the CIS controls, because I often say to a client, well, okay, so you trust your IT provider. I'd even say that to us for our clients. Like, how do you know that we're doing our job and keeping you safe? Like, we're experts in the field, but who's to say that we've got it right? So by having that external framework and encouraging our clients to look at it, then you get that coverage, and it allows them to go through that thought process of thinking of all the things they should cover. And it starts with the basics. It's covering your assets, like you say. You can have an incident response plan, CIS Control 17, fantastic. But how do you know that incident response plan is covering all your systems? So you go right back to the start and you look at the first few controls, and you've actually got to make sure you've got an understanding of the systems and processes you have in place. You might have an IR plan if your local infrastructure goes down. But what if this cloud service you rely on goes down? What's your plan there? So the CIS controls provides a great framework for us to have those conversations with our clients.
Yeah, that's why we've gone all into it, as you know, and I could get lost into it for hours, but it just sets you up with something to give you those guardrails so that you know what to do next, and help to do a bit of a gap analysis with your own environments as well, and even with your clients. We want to open it up. You may not even. I'm throwing this out at you. Do you have any questions for Vaughan, right, or vice versa?
I guess it'd be interesting to see what your uptake in terms of MSPs using a platform like Cydarm. I know a lot of MSPs try and take the burden on of managing the stuff themselves, but it's just simply too much. So they may outsource, a managed SIEM and SOC, and I'd be interested to hear how it's going locally in this part of the world and providing that service to MSPs.
Yeah, certainly MSPs have not been a core focus of ours. We've just found certainly they're generally a bit on the smaller side, and very often they don't need yet another tool to work with. They already have too many tools. Eventually, we do hope to be able to reach that market. But when you have I guess, a dedicated security operations platform, then you very often need dedicated security staff to work on it. So, our platforms, for a small MSP, it's probably not the right fit. I think when you get to something that's, like a national level MSP, and it starts to look more like an ISP, something like that, then at that scale, you have to have an internal security team, and they're going to be, very well versed in security, and that will be a specialist function in the business. And I think at that point, it makes sense to have a specialized platform. But we're always open to looking for ways to increase our offerings, and certainly if there was a market for MSPs that want to have a platform where they can, store playbooks and manage processes around incident response, then we'd certainly be keen to look at it.
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of points there that we raise quite regularly is around resourcing, having those dedicated people to do that. And I think most MSPs, even in some of the bigger, so MSPs that focus on the SMB market, still have those challenges around resourcing, the right resourcing, right? Not just putting a level 1 tech in there and monitoring a SIM solution, but actually knowing what they're doing, having had the training expertise in the security world. That's not going away soon because there is a massive shortage of security experts, obviously, globally. That's where we typically suggest, to Vaughan's point, to partner with an organization that does. So maybe an MSSP that already has this built out and has the capabilities, or even working closely, like we mentioned earlier, with your insurance companies, and leveraging what they know and their expertise as well, and helping to sort of build that in as part of your planning. But there are steps to take where you still need to plan, right? As an MSP, you still need to know, that communication line, escalation points, as we've already discovered. But there might be opportunities for you to actually partner with someone that can actually handle that additional workload or has the expertise around what you're trying to achieve, particularly if you're working with highly regulated environments, right? Government agencies, healthcare, education, etc., that might have those specific needs in place. All right, we're going to wind things out. Any final thoughts from you before we advice for partners looking at just getting into this process?
I just reiterate, it's just a great conversation to have. The more we can do this, the more we can help sort of raise the tide of everyone who's in this space, which is fantastic. I think the likes of incident response planning, especially in our market, is something that's often left by the wayside. They don't think it's going to happen to them, but I just reiterate, it's great to be prepared, and I guess we're doing that ourselves, and we're going to push that out to as many people as we can, and just get everyone prepared.
Yeah, thank you. Vaughan, any final thoughts and comments?
Yeah, I would recommend, certainly for Australian businesses and maybe New Zealand businesses too, depending on what you have locally, the ACSC website, so cyber.gov.au, has a great collection of resources to get informed about the risks and to start your incident response planning journey. And these documents are targeted at individuals, small businesses, large businesses, critical infrastructure. They've got a whole range of guides. ASD even has, or rather ACSC even has guides in something like 28 different languages, to recognize the fact we have, people who don't speak English as a first language here in Australia. So I would say, yeah, start there, learn about it, figure out a solution that's right for you, and then, seek the help or advice you need to execute that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's pretty much what I teach in my course, actually. So I'm glad you raised it. Thank you again for your time today. It is, like I said, a topic that a lot of partners aren't quite across but it is an important topic that, as you mentioned, needs to be addressed by many, by most, if not all. So appreciate your time again today. Thank you for being on this. This was another Pax8 Cyber Collective podcast, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Very good. Thank you, Elliot.
Thanks, Elliot.
Thank you, Vaughan.